One of the things that's happened in recent years is that God has shown us the difference between friendships and alliances. That's really painful in a lot of ways, but the flip side of it is you find people that you never knew we were on the same side.
Hey, I'm Jody.
And I'm Chris.
And we are Loving the
Outcome.
Welcome to our podcast.
We're a husband and wife who rock out together.
We're parents of Milo and Ziggy.
And we're following Jesus as best we can.
Our story began in Winnipeg, Manitoba, where we fell in love, got married, and decided to sell everything and travel in our Jetta, selling CDs out of the trunk of our car.
The road led us to Nashville, where we signed a record deal, started our family, and now the four of us travel together in our minibus, White Neptune.
I know, crazy, right? Our life is a road trip.
And we want to invite you into it.
So come along for the ride as we chat with some of our favorite people about family, spirituality, wellness,
And of course, music.
Come on, let's go. Complementarian.
Mm-hmm.
Yes or no?
Yes, but it's kind of like any number of other things. If someone says, are you whatever the word is, I'm usually going to say, well, what do you think that word means?
Right.
That's good.
So in the broadest sense, every Christian is complementarian and every Christian is egalitarian, because every Christian recognizes that both men and women are called to be heirs of Christ, called to be shoulder to shoulder in the cultural mandate and in the Great Commission, all of those things. And every Christian recognizes there's something different in the vocation, for instance, of a mother and a father.
Sure.
Okay, so I think that is the case. And so there are passages of Scripture that I think would say that there's a unique fathering role in the church and a unique mothering role in the church. Now, having said that, what I find is that you can have, I have a very good friend who disagrees with me on that. She's an ordained Anglican priest.
Yep.
We get along great.
Right.
And she will often say, she said, it's just so good. She came in, was in a meeting. I was the only man there, but a bunch of women, all of whom I think were complementarian, but her. She said, it's so great to be here. She said, I would much rather be with a group of people who don't think I should be ordained because they believe the Bible than with a group of people who don't believe the Bible because they think I should be ordained. And, so she may have someone over here where she says, this person is saying, who cares about 1 Timothy 2? The Apostle Paul was a misogynist. She's going to say, we may agree on women's ordination, but we don't agree.
Yeah.
And I would have someone over here who is a misogynist or who takes what's at best tertiary issue in Scripture and magnifies it to where everything is being seen through the lens of gender and say, you may agree with me about who is being ordained, but we do not agree. So in that sense, it's almost more important how someone is getting there than it is what their actual position turns out to be. Now, I think the problem with complementarianism and with a lot of other isms is that often they are defined in terms of, by necessity. They're defined in terms of an argument with somebody else.
Right.
Which means they then can take on a level of importance that actually they don't have, in a way that starts changing and shaping the way that everything is seen. So, in the broadest sense, complementarians are people who think there are some differences between some of the vocations of men and women in the church and the home, a minor number compared to everything else, and disagree on all sorts of other things, even about that. But, when that becomes a defining issue, then it is a constant narrowing of, so I was having to deal with often the charge in my circles that I'm a radical feminist. because I think that the role of leadership, that when it is given to men in Scripture, is, it seems to me, not about holding power, but about how to lead in sacrificing power for the good of others. And often what happens is there can be women who are not at the table in such a way that kind of leadership becomes, people don't even know what it is that they're not see. And because people can, on a lot of these things, they're worried about a slippery slope into something that they're
Sure.
worried about. But sometimes you forget there are slippery slopes on both sides of the mountain.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
if you're saying, I'm going to get all the way over here
Yeah.
so that I don't become that,
Yeah.
you often end up just as wrong on the other end of that.
Right. So is there a difference? I didn't, again, not growing up in the same, in the SBC, is there a difference in your view between an ordained, like female pastor, or just can women come speak behind a pulpit? Is there a difference between
Yes,
those two
there
things?
is a difference.
Okay.
There is a difference there because, again, if you're coming back and saying, well, can women teach?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, obviously. If not, then you can't make sense of the New Testament. I mean, Jesus
I
is-
mean, a mother. I mean,
Yes.
let's bring it right back to that.
Yes,
Right.
and Jesus is appearing after the resurrection to whom? Who
Right.
then go to the apostles. I
Exactly.
mean, you have that all through there. The
Yeah.
question is there a unique aspect of ordained leadership? And I think that there is, but that means that there are so many other things that are both open to people regardless of gender, but also so many other things where the Bible hasn't spoken to that clearly. And so we may have different opinions about that, but can still live with one another and work with one another. That's what I think That's what I think. So I think there are some things where I would say I'm not even sure, and I could be persuaded on these aspects of it because they're not where the lines are drawn.
Yeah, I think sometimes we, in terms of gender roles, in being a husband and wife on the road, and Chris is a strong leader. I mean, I fell in love with him because he knew how to, in the best way, call me out and put me in my place in the most loving way, to call me on my bull and, just be like, okay, wait, and I loved that because I wanted someone who could that we could do that together, not in a fighting way, but in a real healthy, bring our brains to the table and our hearts to the table kind of way. But I was the front person. He was the bass player and we became a band. So I'm definitely the one out front most of the time doing most of what people would think is the leading.
Right.
I'm really no more a leader than he is.
Right.
But if someone were to tell me I couldn't speak, I would want to speak just because they told me I couldn't do it.
Right.
Because in me, that causes a tension where I go, but I've known since I was 3 that God put something in me to share.
Yes.
So
That's
the
right.
tension of that would be very hard for me
Yeah.
in a tradition that wouldn't allow that gift to be realized.
Yeah.
And so that's just a personal comment
Yeah,
from
yeah.
the side. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about it, because it's...
Well, and I grew up, I was not a very rebellious child, but I grew up loving bands that, I love rock and roll, which is by definition
Right,
rebellion. So that, I could see that in her. And it's funny because the band that I was in, that I started in, we had, 3 guys that nobody wanted to be the front person. We're all just like, no, you do it. No, look, we're like the Beatles. We have 3 front guys. And then I watched Jody, and she was just grabbing the mic and destroying the stage. And I was like, I want to be in a band with her.
And I was like,
She
"Do you
knows
wanna
what
be in my
rock.
band?"
She's rock and roll.
Yeah.
But But people get confused and thrown off, especially because he's not a morning person. So we'll show up to a church at 8 a.m. for sound check, especially for joining their band or something. And they talk to Chris.
This God's sense of humor.
They just go straight to Chris and want Chris to have, and even in like interviews or Q&As, so Chris, tell me all the answers to life. And Chris is like, be a nice human, love God. And like 2-second answer. And they're like, and so they expect things from Chris.
Can I get chapter and verse on that?
Yeah.
And then Chris is like, do the laundry, is loving your wife. And they're like, okay, that's your answer. Like, what? And then I'll have a lot to say about something.
Yeah.
And so we deal with that a lot.
Oh,
Just
absolutely.
Expectations
Absolutely.
on the man and the woman, and trying to honor the space we're in, yet still bring ourselves to the table to go, no, I am strong in these ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe I'm strong in those ways because God created me that way, and God is not opposed to who I am.
Well, that's why I think if you get too rigid on these things, you end up with, I mean, for instance, just define the difference between mothering and fathering.
Right.
I mean, we all know there's something different.
Yeah.
There's something different going on there, but you can't sort of easily put it into a compartment. Well, the dad is authoritative and the mother is nurturing. Really? The mother's not authoritative? Yes, she is. The dad's not nurturing? He better be. So it's not easy to say, but there is something that's different and that we need both. But if you try to go in and unspool that mystery too much, you end up with something that doesn't resemble mothering or fathering at all. You end up with something that's more like, a corporate board structure, and that's not what the Bible's teaching.
Right. No, it's like that thing. I mean, we're raised in church with the 10 Commandments and memorizing verses and with a guide of truth, and then you also want your kids to be critical thinkers.
Right.
It's challenging.
Yeah.
It's really hard
Yeah.
to go, here's what the Bible says, here's how we live. Yeah, but there's this kid in school that da-da-da-da-da, and I told him that was wrong. Well, no, okay. How do I help you understand who you are and yet know that love is more important than anything else? Mm-hmm. I mean, I just don't know if you have an answer for me on that, but it's
well,
it's
I mean, I
challenging.
think you have to. I mean, we have a situation with not at our church, but in another context where I'm not a young Earth creationist. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
And folks who are, that's great.
Sure.
This podcast is over.
Yeah, that's not how I interpret Genesis 1 and 2.
Right.
But my smallest son, who's 9, was in a context where the person was just saying, this is Leviathan in Job is a Tyrannosaurus, or whatever the argument was. And so he comes to me, and I saw it as an opportunity to say, here's why she reads the Bible that way. And there are people who love Jesus and believe the Bible, and they think that's what the Bible teaches, and they may be right. Here's how I see it, but here's where we would agree. And so what I'm trying to do is to find those moments where I can come in and say, here's how
beautiful.
to kind of evaluate things when you're being told, but not just to evaluate them, but also to evaluate, okay, how important is this, and how is that person getting to that perspective?
Yeah.
That's kind of it, depending on the personality type, that's harder to do.
Yeah. No, I love that, though. Like sitting in questions with your kids.
Yeah.
And not making them feel bad
Right.
about that. Otherwise, you're guilting it's just a guilt hamster wheel as they grow up. I'm not allowed to ask questions. Faith means having no questions. No doubts and faith. That there is no faith without some doubts.
Well, or I mean, even when you're talking about things that aren't faith. Someone was talking to me about asking her mom, where do babies come from? And her mom's reaction was to gasp and to say, where did you get the idea to ask that question?
Sure.
And we're not going to talk about this until you're older.
Like shut it down.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's going to give a really skewed
Yep, exactly.
vision.
Right, right.
For later on.
Even when it comes to Halloween, I've had so many DMs. Hey, do you guys let your kids dress up for Halloween? I don't know if I'm allowed to do that. What should I do? And I love that they're asking, but I'm also chuckling because it's like, if we make things a big thing, if we give all the power to, this is evil, this is what, like, no, our kids don't interpret Halloween through a lens of evil deeds, because we see it as a chance to dress up as a cool superhero and go get Halloween candy and hang out with our neighbors. At the same time, have I gotten a lot of questions about graves and about death? Lots. And we talk about it. I mean, our neighbor just died. He was like their grandpa. It's the first death our family has really felt when our kids were old enough to cry about it at night. And watching them process it, especially during Halloween, where there's a lot of graveyard stuff. And I think it's good to normalize talking about death. And so we've used that as an opportunity to go, yeah, let's talk about those questions. And at the same time, I mean, Milo's 5.5, told Ziggy when we parked at a Starbucks on the road beside a gravesite last week. And Ziggy's like, what's that excavator doing in this graveyard? And Milo's like, oh, he's just digging up Harold. He's just looking for Harold. He might be in there. And I had to write it down because I died
Our
last
kids have a
week.
good sense of humor.
Yes, yes.
But it was great. It was so amazing to be led into their process, you know, and not shut it down.
Yeah, and they can tell if there's some question that's causing a sense of, I don't want to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
It can create this sense of, well, what else are they not telling me? That
Right.
doesn't mean you have to. It doesn't mean you have to give, every detail to every answer. And there are a lot of. I think some of the things that kids learn the most from would be, I don't know, answers. It actually gives kids confidence, I think, when a parent can say to something, I don't know what the answer to that is.
That makes me feel so good because we're going to have the smartest kids in the world. 'Cause that's like every 5 minutes, like, I don't know, buddy. You've gotten to the end of what I know about that.
Yeah.
I know this much about how an engine works. I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, yeah, and you also the differences in personalities that mean that you're going to be. We have one of my sons is really everything's black and white. He wants to know what are the boundaries, what's here. So for him, I mean, they weren't allowed to have an iPhone when they were little kids, and their neighbors did. And they said to me, well, why can't we have an iPhone? And I said, well, it's because here's what we want for you. And I went through and said that.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I know, he's telling the other kids in the neighborhood, it's a shame that your parents don't love you. And I had to sit down and say, no, the people aren't, they don't, that's not what this is. And then we have another son who's
That's
just
funny.
really chill, and his default would be whatever. Everybody's doing their own thing.
Right.
For him, you have to pull him in a little more this way.
Right. Yeah. Why can't they just be the same?
Right.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I mean, I know for me, we're both goofballs, but my dad was like, he was super goof. Like, he was just like, anyways, like, we did a FaceTime with him the other day, and the first thing he did was put in these like fake teeth and giant glasses, and Ziggy was just like, I'm like, Dad, well, yeah, he used to do that to me too. Like, I remember he picked me up from skating practice when I was like 6 or 7, and he hadn't smiled at me, and he picked me up, and it was dark, and we were in the car, and I was like, Dad, what's going on? And he turned to me, and he just, this big smile, but he had fake vampire teeth in. And I was terrified.
Yeah.
And he was just laughing all the way home. And I'm like, oh,
You terrified me.
this is my dad.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah.
So now I try and like just make light of all this stuff, like make funny zombie sounds and stuff like that, and just like kind of take the power out of it a little bit.
Diffuse it.
Yeah. And I mean, I went through a period where I shunned Halloween, and
I think if we grew up in church, we all did.
And thankfully I grew out of that, I think.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, man.
Halloween's. I'm baptizing my son Sunday from when we're recording this now, and I realized he's the son who was born on Mardi Gras, which is a big
Yeah.
event where I'm from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Born on Mardi Gras and baptized on Halloween. I don't know what this says about you.
But you're taking all the power out of what everyone would say. These are the most evil holidays in the world.
We're going to make that the audiogram. That's what people are going to take away from our interview. They're going to be like, I got to listen to this. So, okay, I'm not going to have time to get through all the questions because there's just so many good ones. Brianna asked, where are you remaining curious where ideology or theology used to be cemented?
A lot of areas. But I think more than just in any particular sort of this issue or that issue, it's more in terms of what I thought that theology could do. I'm a theologian. I think theology is important. But I think early on, I would look at some of the things that I had experienced in kind of nominal cultural Southern Christianity I didn't think were helpful. And I thought the answer to that is deeper theology. And that will answer the carnality and the meanness and the all of those sorts of things. And then later I find out no, actually it's people are able to do all of that and be able to quote really good theology. So there has to be the way, the truth, and the life all held together.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of truth with no life. And
Oh, that's good.
just didn't want to go in that direction. So there's a sense in which, there are people that early on in my career as a theologian, I would have rolled my eyes and sort of dismissed as, this person's a pragmatist and whatever. And then later, what I found out, when those were the people who were there in my life in moments when I really needed them, not just in terms of their being there, but also because they were really wise theologians, actually, in ways that I wasn't able to see because they walked with Christ. And so that has really, I think one of the things that's happened in recent years is that God has sort of shown us the difference between friendships and alliances. And that's really painful in a lot of ways. But the flip side of it is you find people that you never knew. I never knew we were on the same side. And
so
we
beautiful.
really are. And I think that's one of the things God's doing and is doing that.
That is a great way of defining it and looking at it. Like, am I just part of a club or do I actually have a real friend here? That's good. Okay, Anne asked about Halloween. We got that. Emily wanted to know, what would you say, what would your advice be to someone looking for a church for the first time who has eliminated all SBC churches because of what leadership has done or not done in the past months?
Well, here's what I would say is...
Emily, bring in the question.
Yeah, I would encourage her not to eliminate all of the SBC churches because I think she might be missing out on maybe a church that is really good for her. So you really can't in that sort of... and it's not just true in the SBC. It's true in so many different institutions that I see where right now you kind of have the opposite of what used to be the case, where the healthiest people are the least engaged, and the unhealthiest people are the most engaged. Because the healthiest people have lives and ministries, and they don't care about serving on some committee or doing something like that. And so there are just a lot of really, really great churches that have absolutely nothing to do with anything that she may have seen in some other way.
Sure.
And so I would say just make the distinctions in a different way. Maybe visit and see how something feels or lines up before you make that.
That's good.
Yeah, that is good. Okay. Vincy says, why is being saved and baptized so key today when Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Solomon, etc. were not, yet we believe they're in heaven? Okay, so Old Testament, people that were not necessarily saved and baptized that we believe are in heaven, but we make such a big deal about being saved and baptized now. I think that I'm getting that right.
Because they were alive, they existed before Jesus.
Yeah, it was old covenant, covenant, new covenant distinction.
They
Yeah.
actually said in brackets, please don't say it's because it's Old Testament, but I don't know how we really get
But
away from
but it
that.
is. I mean,
But-
not Old Testament in the sense of, well, that's the part of the Bible.
Right.
It's that it was a different covenant. It was
Right.
an old covenant that
Yeah.
is training people to look forward. So what they were looking to is Christ. So John 12, Isaiah saw his glory and spoke of him, referring to Jesus. So it's not as though they're being delivered by some other mechanism. They're being delivered by Christ, but it's with a forward-looking faith rather than the sort of mystery that's unveiled now, as Paul put it,
Right.
where we can see clearly what's
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question that came in 2 minutes before you walked in the door, so I didn't write it down. So the person that asked, forgive me if I get it a little wrong, but I think the tension was, and it was coming from a music industry person going, how do you have boundaries or draw the line around fame? I think like using a platform to be known or using a platform to promote Jesus. Did I get that right? And how have you're squarely in the middle of pulpits and platforms, and how have you balanced that?
Well, for me, and this wouldn't be the case for everybody, but for me, I kind of hate it because
Sure.
and actually, I don't even know if I should tell this, but my wife said to me, this was maybe 2 weeks ago, and I was stressed out because I had all of these things to do, and then, people calling to say, can you do this and that? And I just said, it's driving me crazy. I can't. And she said, I just want to remind you that 2 months ago, you said that you were now radioactive and no one would ever want to be seen with you again. So maybe recalibrate what you're complaining about. And so that's...
Can we have her on the podcast?
It would be great. But, so I think that I would almost rather be invisible and be able to do my work and be able to
Yeah.
affect people and serve people. That's impossible.
Right.
But that's kind of what I don't like because of what
Yeah.
comes with that. There are people, though, for whom that's the big issue. And what I would say is recognize where that comes from. So there's a School of Life book talks about why you see, for instance, so many child stars wreck their lives later on.
Yeah.
And it's because of this. They argue if you want to know how healthy your child is emotionally, base it on whether or not they want to be famous. Because what it means to want to be famous is actually wanting kindness. And what someone's doing is saying, if people know me ahead of time, then they're going to like me, and I will already have this kindness here. Of course, that's the exact opposite of what actually happens.
Sure.
And so the people who are kind of the most vulnerable end up in that situation, and it becomes really, really disorienting.
Because what they wanted, the actual root need and want is not at all being met. It's the opposite.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
actually being abused, really, in a lot of cases.
And for me, people will come up and say things like, I know everybody hates you, but I love you. Or I sure have been
Thanks for that.
arguing with my parents about you, but I'm with you. And I just think, do you think that's encouraging?
How am I supposed to?
Do you always spread your love with a cricket bat?
Yeah. And it's, I think there are people for whom that they like that, but I'm not one of those people. And if I pay attention to that, what happens is I get immobilized. So I heard an interview between Alec Baldwin and Paul Simon several years ago talking about creating art. And Paul Simon said, look, I don't want you to love me or hate me. Because if I focus on that, then I'm not going to be able to do the work, which is how you know me anyway. And so he has to and I think that's right. So, people will say, oh, well, what about this person who said whatever about you in whatever article, I don't see it. I don't read it because
Yeah.
it wouldn't be healthy for me.
Right.
For some people, it wouldn't be healthy for them to read that sort of stuff because they really want to be known
Sure.
and so forth. For me, it would kind of be, I would be hurt by it and it would mess with my mind. And what I would start doing then is kind of self-censoring and saying, oh, and I noticed that about myself for a while, that I would say something and then I would say, ooh, if I say that, here's what the response is going to be. And I realized if I start thinking that way, what I'm going to do is to turn into a hack, which is just saying I'm just going to edit and hold back what I really think.
Yeah.
And that's the very thing I'm trying to avoid to do.
Yeah, for approval.
Yeah.
Basically.
And so I just want to say, I'm not telling you everything that I think all the time, but everything I'm telling you is what I think.
Yeah.
And I'm probably wrong on a great deal of it. I know I am because I can look back at times in the past and see,
Right.
that's, I was so wrong on this, that, or the other.
Yeah.
But I am telling you honestly what I think
Right.
and believe. And if I
Yeah.
pay too much attention to that, I'm not going to be able to do that. So
You're
for
not going to
somebody,
be able to say anything.
yeah. And somebody on the, there are people who talk about in the music industry why songwriting suffers
Yeah.
when it comes to fame. And it's because when people start songwriting, they're writing about real, authentic things that are happening in their lives.
Yeah.
And then once they turn into a brand or into an image, then they're kind of, it's messing with their mind to say,
Yeah.
this is who I am, and so I have to speak in
Yeah.
these ways. And there's a great biography of Jimmy Buffett that came out about 4 years ago that talked about how the Nashville music industry didn't know what to do with Jimmy Buffett. And he just decided, the biography says, to be Jimmy Buffett. And
It's a hard decision to make.
it is a hard decision to make. But if Jimmy Buffett had decided to be Glenn Campbell, we wouldn't know who Jimmy Buffett is.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that's something to keep in mind.
That's such
Yeah.
it's so good because coming from Canada, I mean, I didn't really know who Jimmy Buffett was until we moved down here. And the first time that I heard his songs and saw pictures of him, it's like, that just kind of seems, that's not rock and roll. But then you travel the South and you go on a cruise and you just kind of live in that world. And it's like, I get it now. Yeah. I get who Jimmy Buffett is. I understand. And it's like, Jimmy Buffett. There is no one more Jimmy Buffett than him.
Yeah.
He's
adapting to his own
perfect.
lyrics, as someone said in this biography.
Right.
My
Right.
wife, someone was asking about, me to her, and she said, if you want to know who he is, he's a Jimmy Buffett fan, but the Jimmy Buffett songs he likes are the melancholy musings on death. So, death of an unpopular poet, and he went to Paris and so forth. I was like, that's a pretty accurate.
Right.
There you go.
The Halloween Jimmy
The
Buffett songs,
Halloween
right?
Jimmy Buffett, that's right.
Not to get all Enneagram, but now I'm
Okay,
curious. 'cause
I'm going as Jimmy Buffett for Halloween.
That's right.
Just decided, even if it's cold, I'm wearing shorts.
I'm trying to do you speak Enneagram?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm a 3/4.
Do you speak Enneagram?
Well,
That's good.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a 3/4, so my internal, I am always fighting with myself. Like the authentic, I'm always the 3 and the 4 to achieve and be authentic is always hard for me. And I thought that maybe I knew who you were, but you have a very, what are you?
I'm a 4.
You're a 4. Mm-hmm. I was actually just in this part of the conversation, like maybe you're a 4.
Yeah.
Do you know what your wing is?
I really don't,
Yeah.
but I'm assuming it's a 3.
Okay.
So
So we're like sort of the opposites.
it's a similar
Yeah.
a similar struggle.
Yeah, it is a similar struggle.
Yeah.
It was
Because
yeah.
I can, if I'm in that 3 mode,
yeah.
I start to lose myself and to not be
Same.
able to respect the work, and that's when I start getting really bored
Interesting.
and dead. And so, yeah, that's
good.
That's a
good.
struggle.
That's a whole other conversation. Last question. Something that was new to Chris and I was this phrase when Trump and right before the election, Biden and Trump, I don't vote for personality, I vote for policy.
Yeah.
I heard that a lot. And I was like, okay, talk to me about that. Because I think I understand what you're saying, but what do we do when the personality is the personality of Trump? How does that play out? And I mean, now we're post-election, but is that something that guides you? And how do you deal with that?
Well, let me put
We're
it
just
this
ending
way.
on a light note.
Yeah. I obviously am somebody was and is very critical of Mr. Trump.
Yeah.
And I always will be. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I have very strong opinions on that.
Yeah.
I understand when people who would say, look, as a friend of mine said, I'm not who voted for Trump. He said, I'm not voting for this person. I'm voting for 1,000 people that are in that administration.
Which is what people mean, right? When they,
I think that's
in
what
part.
most times what people mean. And
Yeah.
if people actually did that, I mean, it's not the calculation that I would make, but if people had actually done that, that would be one thing. But my fear in 2015, 2016 is that they wouldn't do it. And sure enough, I'm looking around to say, where are the people who will say, I'm glad that you're in office because of the judges you're appointing or so forth, but I am really, really concerned about fill in the blank. There weren't a lot of people doing that. And it's not their fault. It's we're in a culture that says it is really, really difficult not to just choose a tribal leader and just totally adapt to that. Which is why when you find people who, and I'll tell people all the time, if you are completely in line with your political party, it might be because your political party is 100% correct about everything and is inerrant. Or it could be just sort of a 1 in a million fluke that the two things happen to line up. Or it could be that you're outsourcing your own conscience to your political party.
Right.
When in reality, and you can just see this even with doing polling.
Yeah.
People can call and will say, "Do you agree with Barack Obama that?" And then a few minutes later, "Do you agree with Donald Trump that?" It'll be the exact same sentence. And people will give yes and no answers, not on the basis of what the actual issue is, but who is saying it. I mean, that's I think, a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it almost felt, and again, this felt foreign to us because I don't think we've ever been made to feel like how we vote represents whether we're a Christian or not.
Yeah, right.
But that is, I never did anyway. Like, we didn't get married and have a conversation. Wait, before I say I do, how do you vote?
Right.
Which to Americans, that would actually be crazy that we hadn't had that conversation.
Well, especially now. I mean,
Especially now. Yeah, maybe
now.
it wasn't always.
There's always been, and this is sort of part of what threw me into a crisis as a 15-year-old, is there has been this sense of joining the authority of Christianity to whatever the political
Right.
party
There
is.
very much has been.
There has been, but recently that's become quite a bit more pronounced.
Yeah.
Where you will have people, for instance, breaking engagements because they're in separate parties, or having, I'll talk to people who are thinking about getting married, and the conversation they're having with me it's as though you have an evangelical Christian marrying a Hindu and trying to figure out, is this permissible? And how are we going to raise our children? And whatever. But that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about their political parties. I mean, it shows you how partisan politics has stepped in to be an identity marker and to give people a sense of meaning in life, things that no political ideology or movement is meant to do and can do. So you ultimately end up disillusioned and cynical, rather than saying, okay, this is my political party, I'm going to work within it, and I don't agree with all of it.
Right.
Or even if I do, I might not tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because that's not who I am.
Right.
you know.
Can you say that again? That part. It's not who I am. Yeah, and it's strange because I feel like there's a lot to celebrate and a lot to agree on. And instead, it feels like we're just all against.
Well, yeah, and that's what, somebody who's worked so much in Washington, in Congress, in the White House, and so forth. I went to my kids' career day.
Yeah.
And one person asked, do they, isn't it so phony the way that in Washington they all pretend to like each other when they hate each other? And I said, I think you're confusing that with maybe some church structures, because the opposite is actually what's happening in Washington. You have people who actually get along well and like and respect each other, and then have to go out and face the cameras and pretend as though they absolutely hate each other. Because if you don't, I mean, what happens if you're the governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, there's a hurricane, Sandy comes in, and President Obama comes to as every president would after a hurricane, and you greet him at the airport, you're going to get blasted for the fact that you are. Or if you're John Bel Edwards, the governor of Louisiana, and you do the reverse after a hurricane, you meet with President Trump, people are going to say, "What do you mean by doing that?" When in reality, I mean, this is sitting and talking with people and working together, sometimes to say we disagree on everything else, but we agree on this one issue.
Yeah.
And we can work together on that.
Yeah.
That just becomes increasingly impossible.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, something really lamentable. And I think that that's gotten worse on all sides of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
I actually think, and I had some significant disagreements with Barack Obama, but he was really good at this, at saying, we disagree on this and this and this, but we agree on refugees, or we agree on criminal justice reform, and we're going to work together on that.
Yeah.
I think better at that than President Biden has been. But I think that's sort of where American culture is going right now, and it's really lamentable. It's kind of middle school, where everyone is saying, can I be seen talking to her? Is that going to put me into whatever that group is? And so people are dividing out into the cool kids and the rebel kids and the smoking section kids and the whatever, and
so
that's
true.
not healthy.
And is it that the population has forgotten that it's actually their job to meet each other? It's like, we've elected you to represent us, to meet with this person who represents all these people.
Right.
But it's not a job anymore. It's entertainment. And so it's all a video game where these are our avatars. And the job that they have to do is not to use their judgment to decide what's best to work together. Their job is to say, how dare you look down on us? And then the us is just defined differently by the different groups of people. That's not sustainable. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for a country, and it's really not healthy for a person.
Yeah. Oh, man. Okay, last question. How would you define being an evangelical Christian? Like, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to you?
I think it's a Christian who emphasizes the need for each person to come to know Christ and to follow him through a Bible that is true and trustworthy. And so what that means is that we're the people who emphasize that you don't come before God nation by nation or family by family or tribe by tribe, but one by one. And so the best of the evangelical tradition is, I think, the just as I am invitation hymn that is saying to everyone, it doesn't matter how far gone you are, the blood of Christ and the grace of God is for you. That's what I think is at the hub of evangelical Christianity, and to remind the rest of the body of Christ, you must be born again, and you can be born again. So this is good news. That's not what much of evangelical Christianity has come to mean, but that's one of the reasons why there was a time when I thought, I'm going to stop calling myself an evangelical because people think of all this craziness. And then I decided, no, that's too good a word, rooted in good news, too good a word to give up. Let's just do something different.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
That was a perfect epilogue to everything that we talked about.
And honestly, just for taking the time, I think it was really life-giving for us. So
For me as well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. For those of you that don't know, we have a Patreon.
Yay.
What's Patreon, you're asking? It's basically like a subscription to all things Love and the Outcome. But it's more than that. We give specially created content just for you. We release the podcast early to you. We ask you for your questions and who you want on the podcast. We do worship and prayer nights where it's really specific and one-on-one. There's a whole bunch more things.
We geek out on Love and the Outcome songs and how we made them, how we wrote them.
Bass videos a la Chris Rademacher. So if that's something that sounds fun, you can subscribe. There's a whole bunch of tiers, and for as little as $10 a month, you can get all things Love and the Outcome. So shout out to our patrons that make this podcast possible.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Denise and Emily and Stephanie, Michelle and Greg and Misty, Dr. Scott, Jeremy, Emily, Stacy, Lisa, Rick and Marcel, Mary, Biff, Dad Rad, Rachel, Glynis, Matt, Eva, and Sean.
Become a patron. Go to patreon.com/loveandtheoutcome. And like always, if this podcast is life-giving to you and you're enjoying it, subscribe to it. Share it with a friend. We would love that. Thanks, everyone.
This podcast is brought to you by Hope and Healing International.
For $30 a month, $1 a day, you can sponsor a life-changing surgery for a little boy or girl living in Africa. We're talking about club feet, cleft palates, going from blindness to sight. In 1 year, you can literally send a healing hug and change a child's life.
If you'd like more information, go check out the website at lovehealinghugs.com, and you can see video of our buddy Bernard.
This is my son, Bernard. He wants so much to be and play like the other children, but he can't. Instead, he suffers every day. As a father, I would do anything for my son. I love him, but sometimes this is not enough. They say they can heal my boy. I told them, I work hard, but I have no money to pay for it. They told me someone in Canada is paying to heal my son.
For over 100 years, Hope and Healing International has helped break the cycle of poverty and disability for thousands of children in the poorest communities. But we can't do it alone. For $30 a month, you will directly fund the surgeries, medical care, and rehabilitation for a child who would otherwise go untreated. A child just like Bernard. We will send you a picture of every child you help, their treatment plans, and progress reports. And each child we treat on your behalf will receive this bear to hug on their journey ahead. All you have to do is go online or call now. It's that simple.
Thank you for making my son smile again.